thank you for coming tonight. It's a big crowd. Some of you at the door, we talked about registering for the programs. Tonight we had 130 people register for this program, and the room holds 130. And so there's about 110 of us, so we made a good crowd. But when there's big programs, we just like to have registration just in case. But always, always please come, even if you don't make it to the registration, because people don't show up all the time. So with that aside, tonight we have Jo Johnson with us. She's a local historian. She's been a resident of Westland for 50 years. She was on the Historical Commission for 40+ years. She was involved with Eloise for 20+ years, and she actually started the Friends of Eloise. So I think she's a pretty good person to have here. I think Steve Luxembourg put it best when he wrote in his book, Annie's Ghost, which was written about an Eloise resident. And he said, Jo Johnson, chairman of the Westland Historical Commission and preserver-in-chief of Eloise's history. I think that's a pretty good description of her. So tonight we also have Marlene McGee. She's also been a resident for 60+ years, and she was active in the school system for another 20+ years. And she's also a longtime member of the Historical Commission. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Jo.
I think this is the biggest crowd I've ever talked in front of, and I haven't given the talk in a couple years. So if I'm rusty, you'll just have to put up with it. Okay. From a small start in 1839, the Eloise complex grew into the state's and possibly the nation's largest hospital complex. It started out with only 35 residents and reached a peak of over 10,000 in the 1930s. Eloise was unique because Wayne County was the only one of Michigan's 83 counties that ran a psychiatric hospital, a general hospital, and an infirmary division all in the same place. Although the complex had several names over the years, the Wayne County Poorhouse, the County House, Eloise Hospital, Wayne County General Hospital and Infirmary, it was commonly known and referred to as Eloise. The complex got its name from the post office, which opened from 1896 to 1979 and was named after the daughter of the president of the governing board, who happened to be the Detroit's postmaster. The Black Horse Tavern was purchased by Wayne County in February of 1839 to be used as a new poorhouse. The tavern consisted of 2 log buildings connected by a hallway, and the Detroit Ypsilanti 4-horse stagecoach stopped at the tavern on its daily trips to allow the people a rest. The tavern was located on what was then called the Old Chicago Road, now Michigan Avenue, in Nankin Township, now Westland, 16 miles from Detroit. The log building was modified for use as a poorhouse and fitted up with wards. Only about a third of the residents of the Old County Poorhouse, located on the John Lieb Farm in Hamtramck Township, agreed to transfer to that awful wilderness. Their numbers were so small in the beginning that an early keeper, Morrison Swift, drove all the inmates to church in a single ox team. A farm was kept from the beginning to feed the residents, and the farm grew as the institution grew. At one time, there were 2 separate farms, one for the poorhouse and one for the asylum. There were also dairy barns, a piggery, a cannery, a tobacco curing building, greenhouses, and houses for the farm workers. Most of these buildings were located south of Michigan Avenue, and they're all gone, and they've been gone for quite a while. The first inmate of the asylum was admitted in 1841. She was Bridget Biddy Hughes, and she remained at Eloise until her death in 1895. On the 1850 census for Eloise, there were 5 insane paupers listed. But after the Civil War, there was an increase in the number of paupers who were also insane, and a new asylum building was built in 1868. The numbers grew until the 1920s, when 5 new buildings, each holding 300 patients, were built to house the rapidly growing number of mental patients. In the 1940s, the state institutions were all full, and Eloise converted beds in their infirmary division to use for the patients. In the 1950s, there were 4,500 mental patients at Eloise. There was more mental patients at Eloise than all the state institutions combined. Eloise pioneered in many treatments for the mentally ill, including electric shock therapy, insulin shock therapy, television, recreational, occupational, and music therapy. In the early 1970s, most of the mental patients were transferred to state asylums. The psychiatric division closed completely with the transfer of all remaining patients to the state institutions in December of 1979. A tuberculosis TB sanitarium was also on the grounds in Eloise from 1903 until it was phased out starting in 1923. It started out with some tents because the accepted treatment at that time was fresh air. Later, a more permanent building was built. At the turn of the century, TB was a leading cause of death in the United States, and Eloise filled a need by providing a place for patients who had exhausted all other resources. The sanitarium was located south of Michigan Avenue. One of the talks, a lady came up to me afterwards and said as a child, they would pack a lunch and they'd take the streetcar from Detroit to Eloise to visit her mother, who was a TB patient. They would sit under the trees and the mother would come to the window and wave and talk to them. The employees would bring them graham crackers and milk. This seemed to mean so much to this young girl when she was visiting her mother, but you can imagine what it meant to her mother. The biggest division at Eloise was the infirmary. It started out as part of the poorhouse, as many of the patients were elderly and infirm. Later, in 1926, a building was built just to care for the many female infirmary patients. In 1930, a huge building called N Building, and later called Kelly Hall, was erected to house the infirm and indigent population. In 1933, there were 7,440 people being housed there. The institutional kitchen in N Building was the largest in the United States. In addition to housing the elderly and infirm, this building housed homeless people, mostly men who were known as pogies, poor old gents in Eloise. The numbers swelled to the thousands in the winter, and when warm weather came, they would leave. They were given free room and board. Those able to work were given jobs at the hospital complex and a work card, which gave them preference in the food line, extra tobacco and clothing. The patients were assigned to work in the kitchens, dining rooms, farms, and do maintenance work. Most worked 4 hours daily. Eloise was among the first medical facility in the United States to use x-rays to recognize and identify diseases. Stanislaw Keenan, the chief bookkeeper, was an amateur experimenter in electricity, and he constructed an x-ray machine in December of 1896. Doctors in Detroit used to bring their patients to Eloise to be x-rayed. There were 2 general hospitals on the grounds. The first was opened in 1922, and it was called the William J. Seymour Hospital. An old building was remodeled for use as a 534 general hospital. It was opened to serve the patients in the institution, who numbered 10,104 at the time, and also to serve the general public. A new 500-bed hospital was built in 1962 on Merriman Road called Wayne County General Hospital. It served as a major trauma hospital for Western Wayne County until its closure in 1984. The hospital had Michigan's first kidney dialysis unit and also did the second kidney transplant in our state. The hospital also served as a training facility for interns and residents as well as nursing, dental, and laboratory students. At one time, Eloise was a city unto itself and was almost self-sufficient. It had its own fire and police departments, a bakery, a powerhouse, amusement hall, Gruber Auditorium, railroad and trolley station, a laundry building, a store, low-cost housing for employees, and even ran a schoolhouse for a few years. The farm provided food, milk, and even tobacco for the institution. In 1935, the Wayne County Library established a branch at Eloise, giving primary the indigent population of N building. The library reported that of all county branches, the hospital had the largest percentage of nonfiction readers. Almost every building had a kitchen, and in 1940, there were 56 cooks employed who prepared 31,500 meals a day. Besides medical office and kitchen help in the 1920s, there were a number of other jobs, such as a dairy cattle herdsman, a swine herdsman, butchers, bakers, mattress maker, shoemaker, seamstress, barbers, shopkeeper, fingerprint men, fumigators, launderers, sewage men, and drivers for ambulance, truck, and tractors. The employees worked as many days there were in them each month. If they missed a day, they were docked. If they did not live at the complex, they were given $5 or $7.50 more a month. Many employees met their future spouses while working there, and many children grew up on the grounds. Lasting friendships were formed between staff, patients, and area residents. In the 1839, the complex was located on 280 acres, and it grew until the total property covered 902 acres. The complex consisted of approximately 70 buildings, including all the farm buildings, medical buildings, employee housing, and service buildings. There is a Eloise Cemetery located on the south side of Michigan off of Henry Ruff. It is surrounded by a grove of pine trees. Those buried there were patients of Eloise whose families did not claim the bodies or did not have the money to bury them. It is Eloise's Potter Field. Burials were made between the years 1910 to 1948. After that, unclaimed remains were sent to Wayne State Medical School. There are over 7,000 people buried there. The grave markers are only numbered blocks of cement, and most of the records of those buried have been lost. The Friends of Eloise have been busy identifying as many of those buried there as possible. I received a phone call from a man that lived in California, and he had a grandfather that was at Eloise. He was a construction worker, and he fell and he hit his head and went there. His grandmother and mother used to go every week and take a basket of food to him. He said that his grandfather would come home for family weddings, and he came home for some of the holidays. One of the doctors had a place in Traverse City or Petoskey, and the doctor would get permission from his grandmother to take his grandfather there a few weeks in the summer. The grandfather loved to cook, and when he went there, he could cook. The man did not know the doctor's name. I did really want to know what doctor it was, but he couldn't remember it. Reading some of the Eloise papers, they mentioned parole for patients. I wonder if this was a type of parole, letting him go home for holidays and for weddings. Most of the buildings were demolished in the 1980s. There are 4 buildings still standing. The fire hall is the oldest. It was built as asylum laundry in 1895 and remodeled the fire hall in 1930. The powerhouse was built in 1923, and it supplied all the heat, hot water, and power for the institution. A tall 200-foot smokestack with the name Eloise was next to the powerhouse. It was removed because of deterioration. I know a lot of people going down Merriman to the airport, you could see that smokestack, and it had the lights on it, and when it came down, it was kind of sad, and we all missed it. The warehouse or commissary was built in 1936, and was a focal point for the delivery and distribution of all equipment and supplies to this large complex. It also contained a butcher shop, cold storage unit, refrigeration, and an ice-making unit. The building now is being used for a homeless shelter for families. The K. Beard Building, which was a former D building, this was the administration building of the hospital. It housed 409 patients. The post office was located here. It had apartments for staff as well as rooms for psychiatric attendants who lived on the grounds. The building was built in 1931 and has Tennessee marble walls and columns in the interior. Last week I called Glenn Anderson, our Wayne County Commissioner, because I wanted to be able to tell you the status of the buildings. The Wayne County Commission voted on June 21st, 2018 to approve purchase and development agreement with a corporation in Southfield in the amount of $1 for the purchase and development of the K. Beard Building, the commissary, and the several deteriorated buildings and the maintenance of Potter's Field. The parties intend to create a campus-based housing for low-income seniors and families in the K. Beard Building. They're going to build 1-bedroom and 2-bedroom apartments. The commission building will remain a shelter for families. They will raise the other buildings, and they will maintain the Potter's Field and build a fence around it. On the front lawn, there's a state historical marker and a stone basket. They will remain. The marker being there will always be a reminder of Eloise. In the minds of many, Eloise was a place of last resort for the sick, the poor, the aged, the infirm, and the mentally ill. Its doors were always open to all. No one was ever turned away for lack of insurance or ability to pay. From the beginning to its end, the institution served the health and social needs of the people of Wayne County. A few years ago, the Wayne County gave a 49-year loan of the showcases and the artifacts that were in the K. Beard Building to the City of Westland and the Westland Historical Commission. On May 15th of this year, the Eloise Museum was open. Thank God, it finally got open. It is located at the Westland Historic Village Park, located on Wayne Road between Ford and Cherry Hill. It is open on Saturdays from 1 to 4. When I give this talk, I always had Betty Squires Zimmerman tell her story. But sad to say, Betty has passed away. But with permission from his daughter, Marlene McGee, will tell Betty's wonderful story. And Betty's daughter's here. Raise your hand. In fact, she once told me she hadn't heard her mother's story until she came to one of our talks. And she now has a copy of her mother's story. So Marlene will tell the story, and I know you're going to enjoy it.
Good evening. Now, I hope you can hear me. Before I begin telling you my life about Eloise, I must tell you the first time I gave these talks, the publicity said, it read, Betty Zimmerman, former resident of Eloise. Now, I got to tell you, that kind of gave everybody a start. Former resident. The thing is, I was born there. Now that I can lead all kinds of speculations and clear you up to tell you that. As you live in your town of Westland, Plymouth, and Redford, I lived at Eloise. That was my residence, and that's the residence of my family. My mother and dad both were employed at the hospital. She was a secretary from Plymouth, and my dad was a doctor, a psychiatrist from New Hampshire, who was a recently discharged from the Army Medical Corps after serving in the First World War in France. He was still young when he was discharged, and he got into the wrong crowd and was doing things that he was getting into trouble. So he thought he better clear up his act, and he applied for a job and got it. And was hired at Eloise. And while he worked there, he met my mother, and they were married, and that's how I got born. And so I was born in our apartment at Eloise, and while babies were born in hospitals at that time, my mother decided she wanted me born at home because babies were being mixed up and you not always got the right one. And she wanted to make sure she got her own. Well, after a few years, I think sometimes she thought, I should have had that baby at the hospital. But she kept me until she was a good old age of 98. My family, consisting of Mom, Dad, and my older brother, Bob, we lived at Eloise because Dad was in charge of the Male, M-A-L-E, division and was required to live on the premises. There were several families that lived there on the grounds, so consequently, there was a dozen or so, maybe more, children that grew up together. As you grew up in your neighborhood, we grew up at Eloise. The dads were in charge of the carpenter shop, electric shop, power plant, dairy barns, farms, greenhouse, bakery, and etc. We went to Norris Elementary School north on Palmer Road, just west of Merriman and north of Michigan Avenue. It was all woods at the time, and Mom's always walked us to school because it was all woods. As Joe told you, her talk about N Building was a huge facility of homeless, or as we called, pogies, homeless people. And Mother and Dads were always afraid that they would get into the wooded area and scare us. When we were older, we would walk and we were able to go alone, and we loved it because we, in the wintertime, had to wear big, heavy wool stockings, all tied up with garters on our legs. And when we got past Mom and Dad, we would then roll those stockings down, take the garters off, and had great big round bowls around our ankles. And we thought, well, we were really hot and looking good. We went to Norris schools, K through 8th grade, 3 grades in a classroom, and then to the old Wayne High, Dearborn High, and St. Mary's. All that time, there was no such thing as junior high, middle school, or even Westland. I've used the term ground several times when referring to the hospital. It really was a campus, or in reality, a very small town. We had our own post office, as well as police and fire departments. There were paved streets with tall lampposts that went on at dusk. And when those lights went on, we knew it was time to go home, and you better do it. And we rode our bikes, roller skated, played hopscotch, kicked the can, just as everybody else did in other neighborhoods. We had a good time. So, and we also, a living mental hospital had certain mystic things about it. People, my friends from school, were always anxious to come and visit Eloise. Sometimes in the evening when we didn't have anything else to do, we'd go down to the grounds on Michigan Avenue and grab hold of the fence. And as cars went by on Michigan and Merriman, we would shake those bars and yell. Well, the people in the car would get to Merriman, turn left, go down east on Michigan, turn around and come back and keep looking at us. And of course, we had a good time, but never let our parents know. The car, every summer, there would be a huge picnic at Cass Benton Park in Northville. Patients were always physically and mentally able to attend. Mr. Hammond, the chief steward, would gather his crew early in the morning and go off to set up and prepare the food. And everybody, the lines of private cars on the circle driveway between N and M buildings would be just waiting to take the patients and attendants to go to the park. After eating, it was off to the county fair, where a special time was set aside for them to attend. Everyone had a wonderful time, the attendants as well as the patients. With so many rules in this day, that would never happen. But at that time, people, it was not just a job, it was a family, and everybody cared about each other, and they really had a good time. And that's what I call the good old days. Every Wednesday at 1 o'clock, the firemen would have a fire drill. You never knew where it was going to be, and I would walk with the fire chief, pull the alarm, and then I would get to ride in the fire truck all the way back. And in the summertime, when the fire hoses would be spraying, us children would get our bathing suits on and run through the sprinklers, the spray, and thought it was the best thing going. In the morning, early morning, you could smell the aroma from the bakery. And if you were hungry and went to the bakery and the door, Mr. Prouser, the baker, would slip you something to eat. And if you were really hungry, you could go over to the cafeteria, and one of the workers would open the door, a window, and slide you something out. Now, you would think that we were beggars, but they knew we weren't. We lived there. And if we did something wrong, they also knew that, and so did our parents. In the winter, we would ice skate in the pond across Michigan Avenue, and with the neighborhood from the other side would join us, and we all had a great time. One of my favorite memories when I grew up was attending midnight mass at the auditorium where the church services were held. I was not Catholic, but it was Christmas Eve, and Father Jerome, the hospital priest, was very special. The back row would be filled with big, burly sheriffs and other police personnel. Christmas was also a time for lighting of the decorating of a huge tree on the front lawn. Patients would be dressed warmly and brought out, and we would have caroling, but Jan Mitley would conduct. The music therapist. In the auditorium, the stage was shaped like a big bay window, with regular stage in the middle, the Catholic on the left, the Protestant on the right, with curtains drawn when their service was over. It would be open and closed as needed. Patients were able to leave the ward and walk over with the attendants to see a movie. When people were performing in Detroit, they often would come to the auditorium. I have autographs from Fats Walter, Jimmy Lansford, and even Maurice Evans, the Shakespearean actor. Before the new auditorium was built, the patients had dances upstairs, and in the basement there was even a bowling alley. When I was in high school, I might sit in the amphitheater of C Building and watch a General Hospital, watch a surgery, or I'd go down to the morgue and visit my friends, or if there was a birthday party on one of the wards, I would attend that. So it was all fun and games before I went away. After graduating from Wayne High, I went to Michigan State College. It wasn't a university then, but while I was there, it became a member of the Big Ten. And I remember one time when I was home for a weekend, I usually took the bus back from Plymouth back up to Lansing. But the ambulance was going up for a special business thing, so I took a ride in the back seat, and when we got up to dorm, I got out, and I got a few curious looks at me. What are you doing out of an ambulance? I graduated the first class of music therapy from the state. This was a new field pioneered by Dr. Ira Altscher at Eloise. Can you guess where we did our internship? At Eloise. I was able to stay at home, and everybody else had room and board. But of course, they came to my house, and it was their second home. The work for school and graduation was all the same for everybody. We all had hard work. After graduating from state, my first job was in Iowa at the State Hospital for Criminally Insane, and in a little town called Independence. While there, I had the privilege of giving a talk at the Capitol Ames and speaking before the governor and legislature on music therapy. It was a new field that only jobs were in mental hospitals. Now they are in schools, general hospitals, clinics, and everywhere, and which is a good thing. State was the first to graduate therapists, and now many colleges have it as a major music major. When I left Iowa, I returned to Michigan and became the music therapist at the Pontiac State Hospital. And I never got to meet Betty Zimmerman, and she sounds like a very wonderful person. Thank you.
Now you know why I always included Betty's talk. Everybody has different ideas of Eloise, but it was her home, her yard, and she lived there very happily. Now, if there's any questions, we have Bill that's going to be walking around with a microphone, and he will pass it down, but please use the microphone to ask questions so we can hear them. And don't ask any questions without the microphone. So raise your hand if you got any questions. There's one down here, Bill.
All right, I'll make sure I'll get the mic to you. And you could just talk into it. That'd be great.
I wondered where the financial support came from for the hospital all those years.
Oh, that's a good question.
That
I don't have the answer for. It was ran by the county, so the county gets taxes. The county gets taxes. I'm not sure. I'm going to have to check into that. I know now, it will be financed by this company that bought it. And I know a lot of people thought $1, but that property was on sale for a long time, and it was not easy to dispose of. There was tunnels from every building to other buildings, and they have to be, taken care of. The powerhouse has a basement that's deep, and that's, of course, going to be gone. So the house properties just didn't sell, and they do have a clause in their contract that if this company does not do what they say they're going to do, there's a certain amount of time they'll have to do it. The county can buy it back for $1. So, no, I'm going to have to figure that out. I just assumed back in the 1939. I wasn't born that far ago, and I don't know what taxes or how Detroit or the county was run. So,
there are many rumors about Eloise being haunted. Could you speak to that?
Well, I have been in every floor of the K. Beard building. I opened every door, every closet, all 6 floors. I was up on the roof. I've been down in the 2 basements, and I have never seen a ghost. So I can't tell you. I know there are people that they'll say, oh, they saw a face in the window. Well, I've seen the picture, and I look at the picture. I don't see a face, so I can't help you. If it's haunted, I don't know anything about it, and it's nothing I can address.
I don't know. I guess this is more a comment. I'm a horror fiction writer, so I like scary stuff. And what I find really fascinating about this is what my perception is of asylums and things like that, which is, they're weird, horrible, corrupt places. So it's very cool to hear this other perspective, because I think a lot of us have a more negative view of just mental health in general. So this was very cool. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Well, when we first started the Friends of Eloise, we had a group of people around, and this one girl said she remembers driving by, and there was patients at those black gates and shaking them and yelling. And then the last one to talk was Betty, and she told how they did it when they were in high school, and it was really a funny thing. And then you do think about them, playing games. And I did live close to Eloise when I came back from California. In fact, I lived in a white old farmhouse on Henry Ruff across from Eloise. And my daughter went to Elliott School, and Dr. Gloss, who was at Eloise, he and his wife was very active with the PTA, and she got invited to their son's birthday party. And I drove her there, and that was the first time I drove on Eloise, and I didn't know what to think of it, but it's fine. And as I said, there was a lot of children that lived there, and they lived quite a normal life. So I imagine the way that it was run, it was very safe, and it is. It gives a whole different story to Eloise.
Was that a self-sustaining farm over there? I heard you say something earlier to that effect.
What was
they
that?
They had a farm,
yeah, there was,
farm?
Yes, there was 2 farms. As I said, one was fed the poorhouse, and the other was the asylum. And then as years went by, there was one farm, although, and they had cattle. They used to take their cattle and what other animals and their products down to the state fair. And the state fair finally told them, don't come down here because you always win all the ribbons. So it was a farm. And what was surprising is they grew tobacco. Now, I didn't know tobacco could grow in Michigan, but if you go over to the Eloise Museum, we have packs of cigarettes and some tobacco to chew, and it's made, from tobacco grown at Eloise, which surprised me when I got reading that.
Well, thank you.
Working our way up.
That's my son-in-law.
Hi, I'm really enjoying your talk. I'm curious, are there any remaining psychiatric records from Eloise?
Any what records?
Remaining psychiatric. My mom was
Well,
there.
you have to go to the county for those, and it's not very easy. And a lot of times, if you want any records on a person, you really have to have documents why and everything like that. Give it a try.
Well, she's deceased. I tried when she was still alive, and I couldn't get any records. She's deceased
I
now.
can't hear you.
I said she's deceased now, so maybe I'll have more luck. I tried when she
Yeah.
was alive years ago and couldn't get any records.
We know also, and we haven't been able to check it out, I don't know if any of you have the Arcadia book, Eloise. Pat Iveson that wrote that book, she was part of our group. And after, sounds like after they left the Eloise Cemetery and they went to Wayne State, some of the bodies went up to a cemetery in, believe it's in Howell. And they said they had some records there, and Pat and I were going to go up there and see what they had. But getting information from the county is not the easiest thing to do.
What department of the county would I contact?
I
Just call?
just call and tell them what you want, and they'll pass it on. Now, there was a story, and I don't know if it was true or not, but there was an old building in Allen Park. It was like a Home Depot, but it was one before that, and the county came back to the county, and they had records stored there, and I don't know if they're still there or not, but.
I noticed in one of the pictures that showed a pond. Was that of any use?
The pond was on the corner of Michigan Avenue and Merriman on the, it would be on the south side. You know where those round towers used to be? It was over there. And that's where Betty talked about skating. That's where they skated. And then the children that lived in Wayne would skate there. The pond was used probably for water purposes or what, because to have water in buildings back in those days, it wasn't easy.
So they had a method of taking the water from the pond and recirculating?
Yeah. Well, in fact, one article I read, actually, they ran pipes from Warren and Merriman, you know, where Edward Hines and the Rouge River is. They were running pipes from there all the way down at one time. I think that was a big problem, and then they did get water from Detroit eventually.
All right, thank you.
There's a woman over there in the blue, if you can find her. Thanks.
Hi, this is a pretty specific question. My 2 times great-grandmother died in 1936, I believe, in the poor section. Unfortunately, on her death certificate, place of burial, they just put Detroit. So she's kind of become one of my holy grails. I'm trying to find where in Detroit. My grandmother just remembers it was a cemetery with a big gate. I'm like, well, you just described about most of the cemeteries in Detroit. I know the Burton collection had some records about transmittals, you know, moving the body from Eloise to Detroit. Do you know if there anywhere else I can search that might have any sort of record?
What about Find a Grave on TV? I mean, on internet.
I haven't found anything on the internet. I think I'm just going to have to get lucky one day and find a piece of paper.
Yeah. You've gone down to Burton?
I've been to Burton, and unfortunately, they didn't go back to, they had like 1937, and I needed 36. It was like so close, I was really sad.
The death certificate says Detroit.
It just says Detroit.
It'd be hard to tell, and I'm not sure where you would go. And as I said, to go to the county, that's kind of a lost cause. Nobody in the family can give you any hints. Have you got other relatives buried at certain cemeteries?
They're all kind of spread out. I'm leaning
wonder if
towards
you-
Mount Elliott, but I can't find her there yet. But
I would, check some of the cemeteries, because if you call them, they're pretty good about helping you. With just Detroit, it doesn't give you much of a
no.
clue. So
Okay. Thank you.
sorry. Keep looking, though. You might be surprised. He's got an answer maybe for you. Bill?
By any chance, what was the last name of your great-great-grandmother?
On her death certificate, it says Spivey.
Okay. Just wanted to make sure we weren't related somehow. My great-great-grandfather, J.H. Cave, is the one whose picture you published in calling for this room, for this lecture tonight. And I've been, Holy Grail, collecting all of his pictures. I have 3 of the pictures that he took of Eloise, and I believe there were about 14 in existence. So just wanted to say thank you, because that was my draw here tonight. And I also know that at the time when he was taking pictures, which was between 1910 and 1913, his sister-in-law was at Eloise and died about the same year as her great-great-grandmother. So just curious.
I'm curious where this Potter's Field is, or where the cemetery is that a lot of these people are buried. And it's my understanding that it's on the grounds of Eloise, and I wondered if that's part that was sold for the $1.
It's located south of Michigan Avenue, right off of Henry Ruff. And right now, it's probably closed, so people cannot go to it because of there was a group that decided they wanted to go in and save the markers. So they came in and they dug them up because they had sunk. Well, they dug up a few and then they would sink, and they were causing a lot of trouble. They were putting artificial flowers and that on, and there was a group, trying to think, maybe 7 or 8 years ago, downriver, they had a exhibit. They had people drawing pictures and telling poems about the Potter's Field. In fact, Steve Luxembourg, that wrote Annie's Ghost, he had met with them. And they said in the spring the place was beautiful. It had, wildflowers and birds and that, and it was very peaceful. So they have it pretty well fenced off now, but with this new company taking over, they're going to, the fence they have now is just it's just plain ordinary fence. I'm sure they'll put a nice fence around it, and I'm sure they're going to do something so people can go in but not vandalize it. But you can pull in there and you can see the fence and the Potter's Field, but the cement blocks is only like this, and a lot of them have sunk, so there's not much to look at. Do you know what year that he died?
No. No, but I know from the internet that there are like over 7,000 graves there.
Well, okay, at the museum that they just opened at Westland Historic Village Park, in their one buildings where they have files and that, there is a book that lists a lot of the people buried there. What happened was the state of Michigan gave the museum these little books, and they had the people listed. There was like, there must have been 30-some books. Well, people would call, and they didn't know what year anybody died, so we couldn't help. And my husband and I took them home, and we put them on the computer. So if people called and tell us what year, we could check, or they gave us the name, we could check and see when they were buried. And that's how the Friends of Eloise started. After we got this book put together, we went over to K Building, the K Beard Building, and Frank Rembush was working for the county and ran it. And I had said to Frank, we're copying these, and he said, oh, that's wonderful. And I said, would you like a copy? And he said, oh, I'd love one, because he was getting calls all the time. And then he mentioned that people would come in, they'd bring something from Eloise, and he had all those showcases there. Well, Frank was working for the county, and he got busy, and they'd give him something, and he'd shove it in this showcase, and he'd shove it in this one, and it was all mixed up. So Pat Ibbison and I decided, we asked Frank, what if we started a group, what would he like us to do? So he put the list together, and that's how the Friends of Eloise started. And we did work on the showcases, and those are the showcases that finally came back to the historical. So we do have quite a few death records of the people that died at Eloise.
So I have one more question. When people died at Eloise, were they cremated? Were they embalmed? Were they in a casket?
They were embalmed, because I'm trying to think of the man's name. He was he had an undertaking place, and he also was, I think, a state rep. And he was complaining because he didn't think the bodies were taken care of the proper way. So they decided they would have this funeral home. That's what he had, a funeral home, and he would come in and they would take care of the bodies. So they were embalmed, and if they didn't have any clothes, they would dress them up. If there was any people coming to the ceremony, if nobody came to the ceremony, they went in the box or casket nude, and so they did embalm them in that. So
that was all paid for by the county, I think.
Well, it was paid by who did it was the people that worked at Eloise, and I'm not sure how the funeral home got paid. His son did it.
It's a two-part question. On the graves there along Henry Ruff, they rediscovered several thousand of them a couple of years back, or 15, whatever. When I was over, a lot of them are just cement blocks with numbers on them, which relate to the patient's number, and if the files were lost or burnt, whatever, they did lose records of that. I was talking to somebody that was working on that, and then is that the one that's right along Henry Ruff there? It's almost...
Pardon?
The Potter's Field is right along Henry Ruff there,
yeah.
Right? And they found some new graves there 10 years back or 15?
Yeah. The first time my husband and I went over there, my husband's an engineer, and he thought it's simple. You'd have the cement blocks, and it would say 714, and then yep. 715, 760. It says 714, and the next one could say 200, or it could say anything. There was no rule. I think when they went over there, they dug a hole and put it in, and there was no way you can,
it was done by patient number, and then if patient 705 died and patient 190 died, went right next to it.
Yeah, that's how it was.
It was it was random.
No, there was no plan, and as I said, if you do get a number, you're going to have to look very hard to find it, because
exactly.
they're just mixed and meshed up.
Second part, on the movie Eloise, was a lot of that filmed on location, or is it kind of like just the front building, the K building, whatever?
Some of it was filmed in another building. To be truthful, I haven't seen that movie, because what happened is the fellow that put it together came over there, and I was working that day, and his story was that the story was going to be a relative that was at Eloise, and they couldn't find. It sounded just like Steve Luxemburg's book. And so I was kind of nice to him, and I showed him what we had and all that. And next thing I knew, the story was entirely different, so he lied to me. So I have a relative that was in the movie that acted the part of a nurse, but I'm stubborn, and I'm boycotting the movie because he wasn't honest to me.
I saw a hand over here.
You probably can get it online. But it really had a little bit of Eloise building in it, and but a lot of it was filmed downtown in I'm trying to think what building it was. One of the, maybe it's at one of the schools. So, and I don't know, it ends up, I think there's supposed to be a ghost in it, so that turns me off.
Hi. Are those tunnels still accessible?
Pardon?
Are the tunnels still accessible?
No. You can ask any young boy, or they're older now, that went to Wayne Memorial, and most of them have been in the tunnels, but it would be very dangerous now. They've got them pretty well closed up, but for a while they were quite open. In fact, there was somebody that was high up at Wayne Memorial, and I got talking to somebody about it, and he even told me as a kid he went into the tunnels.
Thank you so much for living the legacy of Eloise. The draw for me was my dad was an intern in 1940 at Eloise. He was a medical student at U of M Hospital, so apparently a lot of doctors went to Eloise for their internship.
Mm-hmm.
I wish I would have asked him the experience there at Eloise. I never did. However, he went to Herman Kiefer and then set up a practice in downtown Detroit. And I wonder if the indigent and the poor influenced where he was going to practice, because all his life he held his patients that were not rich in downtown Detroit.
My daughter worked for a dentist here in Westland, and he did his internship at Eloise, and he said it was very good and very educational. He said the only problem, some of the nurses tricked him a little bit. He went in one of the wards to check on a person's teeth, and when he tried to get out, the door was locked. And so he had to knock and ask for the nurses, and they thought it was funny to lock. He was good looking, so I'm sure the nurses thought that was really funny to lock him in. So.
Okay.
I want to compliment everybody who was involved with the dedication of the museum. I did attend in May, and it was a beautiful day. And anybody who has any time going down Wayne Road on a Saturday, it's, to me, a small building, but you can do it very quickly. I'm interested in the makeup of the audience. I know you said after 1984, the hospital was no longer part of Wayne County. I had the pleasure of working there 10 years after that. So the hospital was owned by Southwest Detroit, and of course there was that merger with Oakwood. And then the hospital officially closed in 1997. That's when I lost my job, when a few hundred of us were walking out of the building, and the hospital was closed then to make plans for the Super Kroger and the golf course. Date I mentioned is when it was closed by the county. Right. And you're right, Oakwood did run it for a few years. I'm just wondering, in the audience, is there anybody who worked with it after 1984 that was part of the hospital when it closed? Aha. And is there anybody in the audience who worked with it when it was part of Wayne County? Thank you. Okay, maybe one more, Bill, over there. I apologize. My talk was a little rusty. As I said, I haven't given it in a few years, and I haven't given it in the crowd this big. And I'm not an experienced speaker, so.
Well, I think she's doing a pretty good job. How about the rest of you folks?
Thanks.
Thank you very much, by the way. This is very interesting. I wasn't born in Michigan at all, but Eloise has always fascinated me. But I was interested in something that came up when the first-person account was being read. Something about the therapies, the innovative therapies that they started at Eloise, and I wasn't sure if there's something more in the histories about the birth of those therapies and, you know, how they morphed or how they were received by the public or by other mental health facilities.
I haven't seen anything, you know, on that. If you want pictures and everything, that Arcadia book. This one here is a very good. This one here is a very good book. Pat Ibbison, that put this one together, was a nurse at Eloise, and she right now she's chairman of the Friends of Eloise, and she also put the text for the state historical marker together. And this has a lot of pictures, and it has a lot of information. So as far as any other book, most of them you can't, they have several books here, but they are reference books. You can't take them home. So, oh, we still got questions. My folks say I like to talk, so.
Hello. I was born at the old Wayne County General Hospital when my wife and I got married 14 years ago, and I had to get a copy of my birth certificate from downtown Detroit, and I filled out the form, and I put Westland as my place of birth, and the lady could not find me, and a panic overcame me because I knew I was born. I thought I was born there, and then she asked me what hospital. I said Wayne County General, and she was older than me, so it clicked as she goes, aha. She comes back, and my birth certificate actually says Eloise, which is kind of unique, but my mom always used to joke around saying I was born at the nut house. But,
well, you can see it was more than just a nut house, but I don't know in your case.
My wife can answer that one. But I do have a question about the pond across the Michigan Avenue. I know it's still there, but didn't they exhume? Wasn't that a Jewish cemetery at one point, and they exhumed the bodies to dig out the pond?
The only Jewish cemetery I know around there is down Michigan Avenue. Oh, let's see, it's down maybe between Inkster and Beach Daily.
The story I thought I had heard was they exhumed bodies from there and they moved some of them down there. I may be wrong. It's just
I didn't hear that, but I heard somebody said some of the Eloise people were buried at the Jewish cemetery. So I went down and looked around. Well, a lot of the tombstones are in Jewish language, you know, and I couldn't read it. But I did talk to a man that was there, and he said no. But you know.
And one more question: do you know if there's any video footage or any of the tunnels after closure? If there's anything like online, or if there's any video?
No. One of the books, I believe Clark's book, does tell you how many miles it covered. It really went, you know, from would be the Seymour Hospital that's on Michigan Avenue, right next to where the K. Beard building is now. That went all the way to the back, and back at Palmer and Henry Ruff was N building. That tunnel went all the way back there, and then the way I understand, they moved patients by the tunnel, and if the weather was bad, they had no problem because they could always put them through the tunnel. There was miles and miles of tunnels. Nothing, I believe, went on the other side of Michigan. It was all on the north side of Michigan Avenue. But I know, as I said, you know what you should do is walk around and talk to somebody your age, and if they went to Wayne Memorial, they probably were in the tunnels.
Hi, I'm from the Wayne Historical Society and Museum, and we've done some studies on the doctors that practiced in the village of Wayne. And I know they talked about the early days of Eloise, like in the 1839, 40s, where it was a home, an asylum, but the patients were shackled to the walls. It was terrible. But when the doctors started coming out of the Civil War, and one of the doctors, I think it was Dr. Bennett, he was a surgeon in the Civil War. He practiced in Wayne. I think he was the first superintendent. They started changing their therapies, going back to you and making things more humane because they were dealing with the soldiers coming out of the Civil War. So they were already starting to make changes, and it developed from there, but it's quite a great history.
Yeah. They do have at the museum some of the arms restraint that they had on the patient, but of course it might be to stop them from hurting each other themselves too. They did have the restraints, but they did do away with them even later. You know, as the years went by, there was more medicine and more ways of taking care of the patients than there was at the beginning. In 1939, there wasn't a lot known. Okay.
Just one question. How many of the original buildings are still standing?
Well, the K. Beard building is still there, and there's a cute story about that. That was the D building, and K. Beard was our Wayne County Commissioner for many, many years. And she just passed away a few years ago. Her story was kind of cute. McNamara was in charge of the complex. Wasn't he, Leonard? Wasn't?
He was executive Wayne County executive.
Yeah, Wayne, that's right, Leonard, Wayne County executive. And he and K. Beard didn't get along too well. Probably, you know, he was doing things Kay didn't agree to. And she always said, well, he's going to tear that building down. And he said, she said, he put my name on it so he could have the fun of tearing it down. But the building is still there, and that's the one that's going to be made into apartments for the low-income seniors. The commissary is still there, or that's the warehouse, and that's the shelter for families. And it is being used. This new company is going to develop it a little bit more. I imagine it needs some reconditioning. So those two are still there. The fire hall is there. The powerhouse is there. And we did have the bakery, but what was it, 2 or 3 years ago, the bakery caught, well, some kids set it on fire. So that's gone. So there still is 4 buildings left. But I am sure in this statement I got from the county, they did mention it was kind of odd that they were going to tear down the buildings that were the fire hall and the powerhouse because they weren't using it, and also the see, there was a powerhouse, those 2, and they were going to clean the rubble where the bakery was, but then it says in this letter I got that stated that they didn't really say they were going to tear the fire hall down. They said the powerhouse and the rubble from the bakery. I imagine it's maybe just a slip because the fire hall is in real bad condition. So there's 4 buildings, but only 2 that is going to be maintained. There are buildings over on Henry Ruff that the county uses, but that is not in the purchase. I think, isn't there a court over there and a juvenile building, and I think the sheriffs have a building. That was not in the sale. It's just the property that Eloise was used. So,
okay.
4 buildings left. 2's going, 2 will be left. So, okay.
Hi.
Are we done?
I have a comment and a question. My comment is that I was a nursing student in 1973 at Eloise, so I was actively there taking care of patients. And what I remember best about the patients were that most of them were sleeping all the time. We had very, very few medications. I think we had like Valium, Librium, which are both sedatives, and we had Thorazine. And what I remember about Thorazine was that if we took the patients outside, the Thorazine would cause them to get terrible sunburns. So we had to keep them in the shade or put hats on them.
Well, what building? We were in the one on Merriman then.
Yeah, I was in D building.
D building or the new hospital?
In D building. not the new hospital.
Okay, what year was that?
1973.
73. Okay. All right. It was being used as a hospital D building?
Yes, yes, as Eloise, a psych hospital.
Because that, okay, I did not think that was still being used as a building. If you were doing training, I thought they had them all over at the county building on Merriman.
No, no, it was right on the campus there. Now, it's possible that it wasn't the K. Beard building. It was the admitting unit where they would admit the patients when they first came.
Yeah, that would be D building.
Okay, well, that was where it was that I was.
Okay, I did not know they were using it at the hospital that, late.
Yes, yes. And actually then I have...
Because 62, they built the one on Merriman. Okay.
Yeah, that was a general hospital. I'm talking about the psychiatric hospital.
Okay.
And then my last question is the Friends of Eloise are still active group then?
The what?
The Friends of Eloise, is it still an active group?
Yes, they meet here at the library. I'm not sure on a Tuesday, but I'm not sure which Tuesday of the month. If you, I have Pat Ibison's phone number, but it's home, and she's in charge. You can check probably with the library because they go through their office, to get the room. So,
okay, thank you.
But they do meet here.
Thank you very much.
Very small, 4 people. Pat Ibison, 2 other women, and a man. So, okay, I
You
think.
still standing, Ma? Okay, we have another one for you.
Okay.
Even though Northville is I believe it's a state hospital, right? Was there any connection between Eloise and the Northville hospital as far as training or staffing
No,
or?
Not that I have ever read. Northville's being torn down also. No, Northville came later. Northville came later, and I don't think they were associated at all because I'm not even sure what year Northville was built. 1958, okay. So, we're about done, don't you think?
I think so. Okay. One back there. Well, thank you all for coming. Let's give another round of applause for Joe. Thank you, Joe. You were great. And of course, Marlene for sharing her experiences with us. Round of applause, Marlene. So again, thank you for coming. If you could fill out the evaluation form, and especially that green form, if you have any stories you'd like to story, any stories you'd like to share, we'll be in touch shortly. Thanks a lot. Hi, my name's Jennifer. I'm the head of adult services at the Westland Public Library. We just wrapped up a great program at Eloise, and I hope you enjoyed it. If you'd like to see more programs and events at the library, we can be found here in town at 6123 Central City Parkway, or on the web at www.westlandlibrary.org, or on Facebook under the Public Library of Westland. I hope to see you soon.